Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to today's edition of Ask the Expert, Best Practices for Testing. My name is Madeline Countess, and I'll be your moderator for today's call. In addition to moderating, I'll be lending some flavor to our panel of experts for the HCM area. Our agenda today is pretty straightforward. We'll be doing our introductions, then I'll share a little bit about collaborative, and we'll jump into the material that we're here to present on testing. So by way of introduction, I am a director in our consulting services practice, and I've been with collaborative for roughly 8 years with 10 years in the ecosystem. It's my experience as a customer that truly makes me passionate about testing and excited to share this material with you today. So first, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jeff Herenick. Jeff?
Hi, Madeline. Thank you. I'm Jeff Herenick. I've got about 24 and a half years of experience in quality assurance and testing, from leadership all the way through hands-on testing in a variety of different roles. I've been about 2 years in the ecosystem for Workday and with Collaborative for about 2 years as well. So look forward to walking through this presentation with each of you and talking and experiencing and sharing a little bit about testing. Thanks, Madeline.
Thanks, Jeff. Now we have Melissa Cook.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for letting us join you today. I'm Melissa Cook. I am a senior manager in the payroll practice here at Collaborative. I have about 35 years of overall payroll experience, the last 7 of which are in the Workday ecosystem, both as an implementer and as a customer. And I have been with Collaborative for 3.5 years.
Thanks, Melissa. Now let's hear from Tony Gross.
Hello, I'm Tony Gross. I'm a director in our financials practice. I have been in the ecosystem with Collaborative for 7.5 years. Before that, I have about a dozen years of PeopleSoft experience, and throughout all of that, going through full implementation lifecycle and including testing and going through all of the process and pretty much every iteration. And I have experience in both the US and EMEA on projects.
Thanks, Tony. Now, last but certainly not least, let's hear from Breck Furness.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brett Furness. I'm in the organizational change and training with Collaborative, and I've been with Collaborative and in the ecosystem for about a little less than 2 years. Before that, it's been about a decade in higher ed administration, including as a customer for Workday at the University of Chicago and overseeing the implementation there on the academic side for the Division of the Humanities.
All right, thanks, Breck. So now just a little bit about Collaborative for those of you who don't know us already. We are an HR, financials, and student transformation consultancy. We offer a full range of implementation services and post-production support services, including strategy, transformation, organizational change, and training. We were one of the original 4 Workday partners, so we have been doing this for as long as anyone in the space. We boast over 800 happy Workday customers, as evidenced by our 98% customer satisfaction rate, which we are very proud of. We also have, in addition to our depth and breadth of experience, which is unparalleled in the ecosystem, we have over 100 Workday product leads who are active in every area that Workday offers a product lead, and over 800 certified Workday consultants ready to help you face whatever challenges you have in your particular Workday implementation. For us, the secret sauce to our success is that we believe that happy customers are generated by happy consultants. So we work internally to ensure that our consultants have the tools, the training, the expertise, and the network to bring the full force of Collaborative's experience to every project we work on. And that is why we win Best Workplace Awards year over year. So without further ado, let's jump into our testing information. What we want to do here today is to really share with you some of the tribal knowledge that we at Collaborative have, and to give you a flavor for the depth and breadth of experience we have in the area of testing. As we go through the material today, please feel free to send your questions into the chat, and we will try to answer all of your questions on this call, time permitting, and certainly follow up with any that we aren't able to answer on today's call. So first, I want to turn to Jeff as a seasoned, experienced testing manager and ask him to talk a little bit about how testing is different in a Workday implementation than some of our other legacy ERP products.
Thanks, Madeline. I appreciate that. So when I think about testing for a Workday implementation versus a traditional software or project, if you will, the difference is really about feature and functionality versus systemic testing. I'll put it that way. So with a traditional project, the approach is going to be more focused on the features and functionality of each individual component for a traditional software project, where within Workday, we're looking at testing across the system. Think about from hire all the way through retire and all the various components that are included in that systemic test, end to end, really. We want to make sure that each of the features and functionality or components of Workday work and flow together. So that's really what it's about. It's the business process testing more than it is how a function or feature works.
Thanks, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
So next I want to talk a little bit about how testing is structured, because I know when I was a customer, this is something that was a little bit different as well. So from an HCM perspective, we think about end-to-end testing and creating a position, opening a job rec, hiring a person, whatever your staffing model is, and moving through that employee life cycle in order to see that whole end-to-end process to make sure everything is working correctly. So I thought, let's have Tony jump in here a little bit and tell us how that is structured from a financials perspective.
So testing, essentially, we walk through testing for financials, and we set up initially during the beginning stages and go through unit testing. We want to make sure that each individual piece of the process works on its own, and go through, make sure we can create an invoice, make sure we can pay a customer, anything like that. And then after that, we want to go through and go cycle to the full cycle and go from beginning to the end of the process. And that's the point. The unit testing is the stage at which we're where the consultants themselves are doing most of the testing. Sometimes the customer does a little bit, but usually it's the consultants doing the unit testing and preparing it for end-to-end. In the end-to-end, that's when the customers get involved and are actually walking through the scenarios. And the goal is to slowly build, but using transactions all the way through the process in order to make sure that the system is doing what it's supposed to do, and that you can essentially, as an example, procure to pay. You want to make sure that you can raise a purchase order, then create the invoice, and then pay the customer, and the actual money go out correctly. And then ultimately, financials, it's not done. We want to make sure at that point that accounting is created. And so it's going to go through that process and make sure that you're structuring step by step and putting the pieces together so that you fully get the full puzzle at the end.
Thanks, Tony. So next, let's hear from, I've worked on a few projects together. This is a subject that you are really passionate about. So if I'm thinking about a Workday project as a customer, when should I start planning, and what advice would you have for me?
Now, when I think about when I start planning for testing, that's really upfront. As far ahead of the project as you can get, that's when you really want to start planning. And there's a couple different things that you want to work on, or at least consider. So you want to start putting together a good structured test strategy or an approach. That way, it really defines out the who, the what, the when, the how, sometimes even the how long, the where, all those different things that we can put together and plan as early as possible is really going to help the project and the testing, the implementation and the testing that has come together a little bit more smoothly. So when should I begin planning for testing? As early as possible. The first time that you get wind that you're doing an implementation, make sure that you're in that plan phase and you're creating and crafting that test strategy. Good question, Madeline. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. So, Jeff, let's talk a little bit more on this topic, because I know this is an area where you're heavily involved as a test manager. So when we're approaching it, what factors do you consider for how much time a customer might need for testing?
Yeah.
So as you're thinking about planning,
go. Sorry, Madeline. Exactly. As I think about planning, I'm really considering a couple of different things, and that is number of business processes, how complex they are, how many modules, what features and functionality am I including? Do I have just a single implementation within the US only? Is it US payroll? Or is it more of a global implementation? All those factors really play into how much time it takes for me to get involved testing, how much time it's going to take for me to test, as well as even what I'll call it a methodology that we're using. If it's a full implementation, or if we have a launch versus a balance implementation, those are a little bit differently structured. But certainly integrations, that's also playing a part into the length of time that we're taking for testing. And we really want to include that as a factor for how long we anticipate our testing to take.
Thanks. That's super helpful. So Jeff, as we think more about testing preparation, what advice do you have for customers as they're thinking about end-to-end test scenarios? And do you recommend scenarios or scripts for our customers?
Yeah, so definitely scenarios. So scripts are more of that project testing world where I would want to be able to perhaps reuse them or have much more discrete steps that follow. For example, enter username, enter password. But those aren't going to be very helpful for a Workday implementation. We really need to keep those more at a high level. So think about a business process scenario. For example, create a pre-hire record. Keep them high level like that. Otherwise, it's going to take you, number one, it takes too much time to create your scenarios, and those that's not time that you're really going to have. There's lots of other things that are going on in your implementation, and then execution time, because part of a Workday implementation is learning the system and learning Workday, not just validation of those business processes, of those integrations. So keeping them at a high level will help to reduce that time that it actually takes to execute, as well as the creation of those scenarios.
Oh, great. Thanks, Jeff. So follow-up question, as I'm thinking about creating scenarios and I put my customer hat on, how many do I need? How do we go about that? What approach do you recommend for our customers?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So the number is not necessarily prescriptive. What we want to be careful of is that we put a target out and say maybe for HCM, it's 800 scenarios. That really kind of depends on the customer and their business processes and their integrations again as well. So we can throw out some generalities, but it's really going to be on a customer by customer basis, as well as the business process and those other factors that we talked about, such as a global implementation versus a US only implementation, versus the various components that are included. So finance versus HCM versus student even perhaps.
Thanks, Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
So I know on the projects I've been on, customers are always nervous about testing, and they're particularly nervous to make sure that payroll is thoroughly and accurately tested and that we are really able to pay people correctly once we go live. So I wondered, Melissa, if you can share any additional tips and tricks you have from a payroll perspective to help with that end-to-end phase knowing, of course, we'll be talking about payroll parallel in a few minutes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madeline. So everybody tends to think that payroll is just the recipient of all the data. And we are, but we have to be involved in all of the planning, all the execution of all the different processes. So for example, as you're planning, let's say you have 5 different one-time payments, and the business process for those one-time payments may be exactly the same, and they may flow through the same approvals. So from the HCM side, they think about that as one test execution. For payroll, we have to have all 5 tested because we have to test all of that all of them are flowing through to payroll correctly. So we want to make sure we incorporate everybody in the testing and in the planning and the discussion of the test cases and how they're flowing from one to the other. And in addition to how many test cases you need, something that comes to mind for me when you're thinking about that is how complex or simple are your retirement plans? I've worked with a customer recently who has 403B plans, 457 plans, pension plans, and a match where everything has to work together. So you have to plan out all different flavors of that. So for those of you in payroll and benefits, you have to test somebody who's under age 50, somebody who's going to reach age 50 by the middle of the or by the end of the year, and somebody who's already over age 50. So there's 3 test cases for one item. And then you exponentially consider all of your different components. There's a whole lot of test cases you could have just for retirement. Again, it goes back to what Jeff said about how complex is it?
Thanks, Melissa. That's very helpful. And I know I personally have been guilty of exactly what you talked about from a one-time payment perspective when I'm the HCM architect. So Jeff, before we leave test preparation, any final thoughts on testing for new releases and what we advise customers there?
Yeah, Madeline, thanks. As far as testing new releases, it's really dependent on those optional features and functionality that you're implementing. Once you've selected what it is that you're going to implement, couple those with the base functionality of Workday, the business processes that are customized, even customized reports. All those factors are actually can be a guide into what it is that you're going to be testing. The new release, you also have to consider the biannual Workday releases that are coming out. So twice a year, Workday will come out with a new release for features, functionality, break fix, even sometimes. So it's best to work with your implementation partner, collaborative in this case too, to determine what is going to be changing, to take those into consideration for your test scenarios, things that you may even want to regression test as you get in through your testing for those Workday releases. Thanks, Madeline.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, so next, let's turn to test execution and let's talk a little bit about who should be involved in test execution. I know this is something that sometimes there's some differences of opinion. From an HCM perspective, it's important to me as the consultant on a project that the people who are involved in test execution actually have been involved in the project previously, that they're not just walking in brand new to Workday, brand new to what the decisions are and what's been made. But I thought maybe Tony might have some other thoughts that he'd like to share from a financials perspective about what kinds of people are important to really involve in that process.
Thanks. Yeah, it's definitely in a lot of ways, it's like security in Workday is that it's not so much that you're thinking of the person, you're thinking of the role. Thankfully, throughout most projects, the person doing the role is the subject matter expert in the beginning and going through the project, and they will be the one who will be handling the information after and using Workday day to day. We want to keep them involved early because they're the ones who have the experience of why we've decided the things that we've done. Because a lot of the time during the architect stage leading up to end-to-end, we will say, why not Workday? Because there will be traditional ways of doing things that in the past, it may be system limitations or things that way, that we want to try to break free from that. So going into testing, those folks are the ones best placed to understand why we're doing things the way that we're doing, and to really have a grasp of the system and the ways of doing things. We create scenarios rather than scripts because we want multiple ways of doing things in Workday, and so we want to be able to navigate through and learn the system that way. As we proceed, then other people can come in and get a little bit more in there and do some help to test more scenarios to get through more of the requirements. And that way, it also essentially works as a bit of a training in a way, because we're still in that stage where we're guiding and getting some more people involved. And so then you're able to transfer that knowledge and have those folks then become experts within the organization.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tony. And that is also something that I advise my HCM customers. Some of what I want them to do during the testing period is not just to make sure everything works, but to make sure that their plan for their service delivery model is also going to work. So I like to make sure that, if we think about our HR departments, and maybe we're organized along the Ulrich business partner model, that we have representations from each of the groups. At least one person for each center or each COE, some HR business partners, some generalists. If we have a service center, I want those folks to be involved so that those folks can then go back to their groups and really be evangelists and help their groups get ready and be prepared for what the new world is going to be like day one when we go live. All right, so let's go back to Jeff and let's talk a little bit about what things do we need to put in place for test execution.
Thanks, Madeline. So when I think about test execution, I'm really going to be looking for robust processes around my test scenario management, issue management, and change control. And what I mean by those is, for my test scenarios, I need a process on how I'm going to execute, how we're going to schedule the tests, ranking by importance of the criticality. So, for example, each business process, although they're important, they may not be ranked the same. A new hire may be much more important than perhaps a different or another business process. I also need a good, robust process around issue management and how we're going to tackle or triage issues. We really do, and we'll probably mention this a little later on as well, but we really do need to think about and have those daily triage meetings where we're looking at those issues day in and day out. Otherwise, they can quickly get out of hand. Next is that change control and how we really manage that change that may be coming in through either issues or via other means, right? So sometimes we get folks in that are testing and they decide that it's a good time to make a change to the process. And lastly, scheduling and execution of integrations. That's an extremely important aspect and a process to have tailored out as far as who's going to be responsible, how are we going to handle it, who's going to be the owner. Thanks, Madeline.
Thanks, Jeff. All right, so next I want to turn to Breck, because I know this is an area that honestly really tripped me up when I was on the customer side. I underestimated the amount of activity that needed to go on to get ready for go live outside of the actual testing. What else needed to happen? So Breck, from a change management and training perspective, can you read us into the program?
Yeah, thanks, Madeline. That's absolutely right. There's a lot change management and training during the testing phase. So this is a time that the OC&T team is really developing out training materials. So we're talking everything from job aids that walk the end user step-by-step through a business process to instructor-led training. There's also user experience sessions that OC&T manages, and that's really bringing in participants, some future end users, to assess training materials as well as in-system guidance. So there's a lot of development happening to get prepared and get everyone prepared for go live.
Indeed, you are not wrong, my friend, and I certainly wish that I had met you when I was a customer. So next, let's turn back to Jeff and just talk a little bit about how we manage the actual testing and how we coordinate it. I know, Jeff, we have a number of tools that we deploy for our customers. Can you read us into the program there?
Right. So that management and coordination of testing is very helpful to have tools like we just talked about, and you mentioned, Madeline, to help us do that coordination between our test scenarios, our issues, and even our change control or our change log, as well as tools for integration, scheduling, and testing. Or at least the management of those. But when I think about our management and our tools of those issues and scenarios, typically collaborative, we use smart sheets to help us do that containment, the control, even the execution in the project, and the metrics gathering for all of those aspects. Found them to be very helpful tools for us to use, as well as extremely easy for the customer to pick up and metrics to be gathered, displayed. So that coordination, ensuring we use those tools to keep on track, or at least abreast of the progress that may be or may not be being made, is extremely important. So that management of testing like that is extraordinarily important. Thanks,
All
Madeline.
right, thanks. So Jeff, anything else you want to share on managing testing before we turn it over to Melissa and let her tell us about payroll parallel?
I would just add that metrics are going to be your friend here, and the appropriate gathering of the right metrics are going to be key. That's why, for example, the collaborative dashboards that we have, knowing what it is that we gather, know what it is that we need to gather, and certainly keep our customers abreast of what's going on, is extraordinarily important. So knowing where you are and where you need to be is of the utmost importance. Thanks.
Excellent and well said, sir. All right, Melissa, payroll parallel testing. I know this is a topic that you're passionate about. And so I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you share your wisdom. Tell us what we need to know.
Thank you so much, Madeline. So I think the three biggest questions that we get asked when we talk about parallel is, what is it? What do I need to do for it? And who executes it, or how do we execute it? So I want to talk a little bit about what parallel testing is. Parallel testing is your dry run or your dress rehearsal for go live. By this time, we've been through several cycles of end-to-end testing. You guys have done everything from new hire, all the way recruiting, rec, all the way through hired somebody, processed their comp, got them all through. We've paid them, we've termed them, we've done retroactive processing. We've done it all several times by this point, right? So now your payroll teams are ready to own the process. Again, as we haven't really touched on it, but on end-to-end processing or end-to-end testing, we progressively have you take more and more control. So by the end, you're running all of the testing. You know what you're doing. So when we get to parallel, that's it. You guys own it. So this is the dress rehearsal for your go live. Every payroll piece that we process will be tested, because we don't want to get into go live and you never having tested anything. So we're going to go through, we're going to, what it is we take the payroll. See, Madeline was right. I get very passionate about it. So back to what it is, it's a comparison of your Workday payroll period processing to the same period from your legacy system. So we're actually comparing apples to apples, same pay period with all the inputs in both systems. So now we go back into what do we need? What do we need? We need a plan. That's a recurring theme for today, right? Is you have to be planned and be ready to go. So similar to what Jeff has talked about for testing and planning, we want to start parallel planning well in advance as well. We will have a detailed parallel strategy document, which is a supplement to your overall testing strategy. So we'll work on developing that as well. And that's key. That's going to talk about what are we doing? How are we doing it? who's executing the test cases, right? And as far as it's not just payroll involved in payroll parallel, it's truly an entire group involved. It's HCM, we've got to get those new hires in there. It's comp, we have to get any comp changes in there. One-time payments, we have to make sure the allowances are in there. It's benefits, it's everything. It is a true cross-functional process to make sure we have all those inputs in there and that we've got them all reviewed and corrected. So how do we execute it? I've already talked about that a little bit as well. We take the data from the legacy system and we process all of that through parallel or through the parallel tenant, including time tracking. Do you use Workday? Are you going to be using Workday time tracking? How are you capturing that data in your legacy systems? Do we need to import that into payroll input or into time tracking? Where do your folks request their leaves of absence? We want to go through and process all of those with the specific inputs that you had for your legacy period, and then we compare them. So what do? We take that data and we bump it up against each other and make sure they're all correct. We look at earnings, we look at deductions, we look at taxes. Workday has said by the time we get through our parallel testing cycles, we have to have 99% accuracy with explained differences between your legacy and Workday. And what I mean by explainable difference, in some legacy systems just process things differently than Workday does. And we know that, and we note that as a difference, and we can account for that. So we have to be within 99% of the with known variances before we can clear parallel testing.
Wow.
It's a
I
huge
know
effort.
that. Yep, but I'm always happy to hear it because I want my paycheck to be right. And I tell my HR colleagues that I can absolutely promise you that 100% of employees who are not paid correctly will call you, and they will not be happy. So I think we have some questions in the chat. And before we turn our attention to testing tools, we wanted to make sure that we had some time to answer some of these questions in the chat. So the first question I have you seen any implementations where the customer did the unit testing? And we are actually hearing that is something that is being discussed pretty heavily in the Workday ecosystem. Candidly, most of the cases that I have seen in that particular area are cases where we are taking over an implementation from someone else. For us, what we feel is important is to make sure that customers have the opportunity to spend as much time in Workday as possible. So the advantage of having customers involved in unit testing is to keep them in the system in between that period of architect and the period where testing actually starts, so that you don't lose any of the knowledge you've gained from your Workday training, from your architect, and whatever else is going on in your work streams. But at Collaborative, our approach is that customer unit testing is in addition to consultant unit testing, not a replacement for consultant unit testing. So we are a fan of both, but not wanting to place all of that responsibility on our customers at this point in our methodology evolution. So the next question that I have is an HCM question. So this one's for me too. And it is about end-to-end testing and the employee life cycle. And this is a great question because we think about the employee life cycle, and what we don't want to do is to have groups of people who are basically sitting around waiting for the hires to go through and don't have any testing to work on. So we have to make sure that we sequence our testing in a way that spreads the work out for all the groups. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to have, for example, my benefits team start working on life events right away. Your life events are employees who already work for you. You can use employees who are already there. You don't necessarily need a new hire to do a life event. I want you to do both. I want you to test out Workday's coordination of events, but I also just want my benefits team to test the life events without that new hire flavor. So my benefits team, for example, can get started. My performance team can get started adding goals, maybe doing disciplinary actions or performance improvement plans if those things are in scope. Comp can start on some of the, basic, I got a one-time payment so that our payroll people can see that one-time payment flow through. And this kind of really plays into the next question, which is, do we have any recommendations for cross-functional testing? And yes, we do. And I know Jeff probably has strong feelings about this too, but I have found that it's really, really important to identify those cross-functional scenarios up front and to make sure that everybody knows. So if I'm putting in a benefit life event for someone in, I'm adding a spouse or adding a child, I want to make sure that my payroll team knows to look for the change in deductions, because there are a lot of things that flow downstream to other parts of the system. I want to make sure my integrations team knows there should be a change to that individual's benefits coming over. So what we'd like to do is to make sure that we indicate those in our scenarios and that all of our teams are coordinated. And that's a really important part of minimizing the effort. And Jeff, I'll kind of come back to you there so you can maybe share your thoughts. But I have seen situations where that wasn't coordinated well, and it wound up really making a lot of extra effort for people.
Yeah, I totally agree with that,
So
Madeline.
Jeff?
Thanks for that. And as you talk about the coordination, it's important to do that. Again, we talk about testing and as early as possible. So having that coordination across the teams as early as possible when we're developing our scenarios is going to be important. So that way it's much easier for recruiting to say, hey, I'm hiring this person as perhaps a manufacturing, production, or a management role. That may be something that the compensation and payroll team need to see as they're executing their scenarios as well. So that coordination and understanding of what each functional area needs early on, so that allows that coordination to happen more naturally, is extremely important. Workday really works. It's not just a single component that functions. Workday works as a system from end to end, and it flows that way. So I want to make sure that I'm testing my business processes in that end-to-end fashion with a flow to them, because when it's implemented in production, that's the way it's going to work. It's going to simply be a flow from one business process, from one functional area to the next. So it does need to be tested that way. Thanks, Madeline.
Yep, thanks. That's a great call out, because even some of those transactions can impact our financials. So we want to make sure that we're seeing the appropriate behavior all the way through the system. Our next question is about, and this is really more of an implementation general question, but what do we recommend for the subject matter experts? Implementation is the heavy load. I know I can still remember long days as I was going through this as a customer, and there were some very long days. There were some days when I wanted to call it the work day and night project. So what I tell customers starting out is really think about freeing up those people from their day-to-day job. Where can we, if humanly possible, backfill business as usual? Because the reality is that when you look around your organization and you think about who the people are that you want on your project, those are the people who are the busiest people in your organization. It's not the people who are available and have bandwidth most of the time. The people who get work done, who are strategic thinkers, who make it happen, those people are already super busy. Work goes to them naturally. So those folks are going to need to have some help. So if there's any way that you can free them up, give them an extra set of hands, hire a temp, whatever those levers are that you can pull, offloading as much of business as usual as you possibly can from those folks is going to really give them the opportunity to think strategically, to immerse themselves in Workday, and to give you the best transformational experience that you possibly can get as a part of your implementation. So that's our most, that's our best advice and counsel. In the event that we do run into problems and we run out of resources, there are some levers that we can pull to sometimes help you when we encounter those situations. So that's definitely something you'd want to talk to your engagement manager about and see, what, if anything, we can do that's specific to your situation. So if I continue on with the questions in the chat, the next one is really for you, Melissa. So do you create scenario for payroll for users to run during payroll parallel? Go, Melissa.
Thanks, Madeline. That's a really great question. And no, we don't, because the whole purpose of parallel is to test exact data that you processed in your production for that same period. So we don't want to go off and plan and say, well, what if this happened? That's not going to give us those reliable results to match up apples to apples. We need to process exactly what happens. Now, do those data points need to be entered? Yes. How you enter them into the tenants depend upon volume and what cycle you're on. We'll call them catch-up transactions for cycle 2. So we'll work with you on the best way to get that data from your legacy system into Workday. But we don't do scenarios. We want parallel to be tightly controlled because we want to have that accurate apples to apples comparison.
All right. Thanks, Melissa. I think the next question is actually for you too. So it's about parallel testing and when do we recommend that parallel happen? And are there any situations where it's okay for parallel not to happen? I'm going to have to jump in and say that I am super risk adverse, and when it comes to parallel payroll, I'm a more is better kind of girl. So tell me what your ideas are here, Melissa.
I do not believe that Workday will allow you to go live if you have payroll without a payroll parallel. That's been my experience anyway, so you have to do parallel. And if you think back to the first thing I said about it, that's your dress rehearsal for go live. So that's your last testing activity or your last activity before you go into the deploy phase.
Thanks. Yep, I'm with you. And my experience in deploy is we usually have to run parallel pretty quickly after we go live, or run payroll, I'm sorry, very shortly after we go live. So being ready and feeling comfortable is an important part of a successful go live for my customers. I think we still have a few more questions and we might have time for one more in the chat. Someone asked if we have implementation checklists that we can share. Absolutely, your EM on your project can certainly share with you all kinds of tools that would be appropriate for your specific project. But yes, we have lots and lots of documents and checklists that are available that we share to make sure that our customers really get that tribal knowledge from all of our implementations on every project. I believe we are at time. I think we still have a couple more questions, and we will go ahead and end now, but we will answer these questions in a Q&A document that will be posted. And if any of you are, obviously, if you're current customers, feel free to talk to your consultants, and we can make sure that you get good, solid answers that are really specific to your particular project. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again on our next Ask the Expert, which is our tenant analysis and plan Ask the Expert and why you need one. So have a great rest of your day, and we hope to hear from you again soon. Thanks all.